stunning day. Maybe before we start, I would just like us to, before we climb into the agenda, let me just quickly start by asking everybody just to, if you remembered Prof. Eddie Webster, can we maybe just have a few seconds of silence in his memory, because he is treading deep footprints in many people's lives, and I thought it would be good for us just to share a few moments in silence in his memory. So kindly join me just for a few seconds, please. Thank you, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the agenda today, firstly, I've got the opportunity to welcome everybody to this session, where we're looking forward to the report a little bit later on in the program. But before we get into the formalities, it's also International Women's Day today. So we are also fortunate that the presenters of the report this morning are both ladies. So date well chosen, and we're truly blessed to have everybody on board, and to all the ladies on board, happy International Women's Day. So ladies and gentlemen, with the country's transition to a just transition and sustainable energy, the emphasis of social ownership could pave the way for more inclusive and empowering approach to energy generation. And that's why we're here this morning. Later on, we will hear the report, but kindly allow me to just introduce Devin Pillay. Devin is the head of the Employment Strategy Unit within the PCC, and Devin is going to share a few words with us before we get into the work of the day. Thank you, everybody. Devin, over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hugo, and good morning to everyone. It's great to see everyone online. This certainly speaks to the importance of this topic and the momentum it's gaining over the last few years. Also, let me warmly welcome you on behalf of the PCC to the launch of this vital paper on forms of social ownership in renewable energy. Let me start by speaking through the Just Transition Framework, as you may know, calls for affordable, decentralized, diverse, owned renewable energy systems, and the broadening of ownership of productive assets in support of the just transition. When the Presidential Climate Commission consulted stakeholders on its electricity recommendations last year, labor and civil society constituencies, in particular, raised concerns regarding the predominance of private ownership models for energy generation. In May 2023, the PCC submitted its electricity recommendations to the President, which included a diversity of public, private, and social ownership models for energy generation. At the same time, in May, the forms of social ownership paper was at its inception phase. This exceptionally informative piece of work was undertaken by the team from Nelson Mandela University, and has not only expressed the theoretical basis for social ownership, but have broadly engaged with large groupings of stakeholders within communities, in the private sector, across union federations. It engaged civil society and government, drawing on the respective wealth of knowledge based on policy, regulation, planning, implementation, etc. Further, this paper draws on the deep knowledge from the Global South and Global North, and is imbued with the practical experience and its rich content in the conceptualization, planning, development, and operationalization of socially owned renewable energy systems. Social forms of ownership is not new to South Africa and has been in practice for many years. Cooperatives and stokvels served as a bedrock, particularly in indigent communities, who historically, and which is in practice to this day, rely on stokvels and saving cooperatives to build household assets, meet education costs, build their own productive capabilities, etc. In CASA, the apex cooperative body in South Africa, have for decades worked with communities to establish cooperatives. Recently, it has gained significant traction in establishing manufacturing and agricultural cooperatives. It has for decades been active in establishing housing cooperatives across the country. Without these housing cooperatives, thousands of families who fall outside the formal housing market by the virtue of not meeting financial sector requirements would not have safe and secure accommodation for their families. Similar to the communities, but to a greater level of success, the private sector has seen significant economic growth through secondary and tertiary cooperatives, predominantly in the primary sector of the economy. History has demonstrated the instrumental role of cooperatives in developing the country's agricultural sector through the provision of services, securing better prices for products, and expanding markets. Today, we see the agricultural sector as a key contributor to global markets, with farms functioning at an industrial scale. In 2017, it was established that we have over 43,000 cooperatives in the country. Interestingly, this paper goes beyond cooperatives and speaks to different forms of social ownership. Ownership by local government, ownership by workers and communities, or a combination of ownership by these parties. It concludes by identifying the 4 models best suited for South Africa and goes further to develop a work program, spelling out the actions required to realize a socially owned renewable system. I conclude with the following note. As a country, we have a fairly good economic and industrial policies in place, but have failed to realize the social and economic objectives and adequately respond to the triple challenges. It has been argued that failing to address the structural challenges of the economy will continue to perform sluggishly. Forms of social ownership is one measure in responding to the structural changes by changing the mindset of workers and communities from perceiving themselves as suppliers of labor only to one where they become owners of the economy. This shift in mindset, coupled with the experience gained through ownership of productive assets, will develop a broader appreciation of market forces and how best they respond to market forces for their collective well-being. We will see an improvement to household income as other sources of income is supplemented through dividends earned from socially owned renewable plants. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, everyone.
Devin, thank you for that short introduction. Already food for thought. 43,000 co-ops. That's a big opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my absolute privilege to welcome our speakers to the platform. But before we get there, so the PCC is benefiting from these valuable and strategic collaborations with, amongst others, universities, institutions in our country. And one of them today is our collab with NMU, and it's my privilege this morning to welcome to the stage, the virtual stage, Prof. Janet Cherry and Mareka, both of them from the university, and to share their insights in terms of what they found in the report. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're in their capable hands. It is Women's Day, so there's no pressure, Prof. And we're looking forward to hearing what you can share with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Prof. Cherry, thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Jacques, for the introduction, and thank you, Devin, for introducing the process of this report. Just to say, our brief broadly was to assess the models of social ownership of renewable energy in particular, and to respond, as Devin has said, to the Just Transition Framework, which calls for, and this is a really important phrase, affordable, decentralized, diversely owned renewable energy systems, and the broadening of ownership of productive assets in support of a just transition. And really, our key finding, if I can just summarize the argument, is to say the potential for the transition to renewable energy, which is happening, to be a transition to a more just, equitable, and redistributive economy has not been realized, but that potential is there in South Africa. And in our analysis from our study of other countries, we found that, you know, in South Africa, there is a binary between public and private, which is the dominant narrative here. And it's a very conflicted narrative. So there's, you know, like Eskom should be privatized, Eskom shouldn't be privatized, etc. We said we must go beyond that. We're looking at the social, which is between public and private. And we came up with two broad frameworks, what we would call social public models and social private models. And then we went into more detail there. We looked in quite a lot of detail at the current regulations and how these have changed, and at the role of municipalities in particular. And just to note, you know, what the president said, I think it was in January 2022, he called for a massive rollout of rooftop solar. And I often use this phrase, I quote this phrase. And we note that the change in regulations has actually allowed for a massive rollout of rooftop solar, but it hasn't benefited the majority of citizens who live in townships and who can't afford private PV solar. So we're looking for this in-between space. What can fill that space to allow many, many millions of people to be producers of electricity and solve the energy crisis in South Africa. So that's a brief summary. In terms of the literature review, as Devin mentioned, we found that in the global north, in Europe in particular, there are examples of worker-owned renewable energy production on factories like Volkswagen factories. There are tenant cooperatives of hundreds of thousands of tenants of buildings, flats, in different neighborhoods in Southern Europe, in Spain and Italy. I think in the cooperative, which is a cooperative of cooperatives, I think there's something like 1.2 million members who own those renewable energy assets. In the global south, in countries like Brazil and India, other BRICS countries, there are very important examples of many grids in whole villages, favelas, that's informal settlements, being supplied with renewable energy through mini grids which are owned by villages or cooperatives. And in other countries like Indonesia and Puerto Rico, there are some exciting examples as well. In Africa, there are few examples which met our criteria for social ownership. And in South Africa, disappointingly, there are also very few. There are some pilot projects, some experiments, which are very important for the lessons that we learned from them, but they are still peripheral to the mainstream economy. So from this process of the literature review and our analysis, we came up with these four broad models. Sorry, are you interrupting me? So we came up with four broad models, and I'm not going to go into these in detail now. I'm just going to say they're outlined on your screen here. And each of them meets a particular need in this energy transition and puts forward a different form of social ownership. So we took these models and we then engaged in testing these with different stakeholders to see how they responded to them, whether they thought they were viable, whether they would have support. And Mareka is going to take us through that process. Mareka, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you, Prof. Yes, the scoping aspect, I think, of the study called for us to explore and frame the body of literature on socially owned renewables, and that obviously included identifying current actors within SOAR. As a fairly new concept for the working class majority, both the just transition and in particular SOAR in South Africa emphasizes procedural justice, as mentioned earlier by Devin, which means incorporating stakeholder consultations to ensure that the views of those most affected are considered. The stakeholder consultations for us, or for this process, was crucial for several reasons, including, ensuring inclusivity and equity, identifying needs and priorities, ensuring policy alignment, engaging diverse stakeholders for social acceptance and buy-in. Also to ensure sustainability, help in addressing potential conflict, including risk mitigation, promoting innovation, and also utilizing the local language, just tapping into the local expertise to inform the project planning and address any other issues. Also linked to the SOAR framework developed from the lit review exercise, the following probing questions informed the stakeholder consultations, and this was to elicit their understanding and perspectives on the benefits of each model, looking at what types of ownership are viable, looking at the viability of the proposed models from a technical, financial, scalability, replicability, and looking at how to facilitate active participation from all the affected stakeholders. Also, how each model contributes to the just energy transition. And finally, just to gauge their appetite, to pilot the models in their respective constituencies. The study identified 6 stakeholder categories, namely your civil society, NGOs, organized labor, including social partners from your business and industry, with government also as their custodians of the regulatory frameworks and service delivery in the country. We compiled a comprehensive list of around 240 individuals from various organizations in South Africa. As per the terms of reference, the consultation process involved engaging targeted and relevant stakeholders to gather diverse perspectives and expertise on SOAR. Formal sessions included engagement with stakeholders such as civil society, organized labor, business, ESCOM, and government representatives, including municipal officials as well. These inputs were gathered through public dialogues, a survey that was conducted online, interviews with a focus on soliciting insights and perspectives on SOAR models rather than to critique the approaches. This feedback was systematically analyzed through transcription and coding, enabling us to identify key themes and stakeholder perspectives in an unbiased manner. Presentations and other additional briefings were also undertaken throughout the study, I think starting from around September, where some of our team members presented different platforms such as BUSA, the Gauteng City Regional Observatory, which all of these presentations and briefings culminated in a public webinar that was held in November last year to present the draft report. Just broadly looking at the responses from the stakeholders, but just a quick snapshot on the statistical responses from the 3 methods employed. The CJC dialogue, which is the Climate Justice Coalition, is one of the 2 prominent climate justice movements in South Africa, and its organizing principles are based on environmental and social justice. So this CJC organized dialogue that was held last year in July, it gave us an opportunity to present the findings from the literature review and engage on the proposed framework. The dialogue was attended by approximately 66 unique individuals representing approximately 49 organizations from all provinces except for Northern Cape, if I recall. The highest number of participants were from the NGOs, CSOs, and organized labor, making up over 60%. Looking at the online survey that was distributed to approximately 180 unique individuals, including obviously participants from the dialogue as well, the response rate was about 26%, which was expected. We did expect a lower response from there, but the highest responses were from the CSOs and CBOs, and I guess because they attended the dialogue as well. But we also received a fairly good response from business and government. Following the survey, we conducted semi-structured interviews with approximately 23 respondents from representing organized labor, renewable energy consultancies, business, ESCOM, national government, and local municipalities. And just looking at the broad feedback for each model revealed mixed reactions. For instance, for the mini-grid model, it was seen as beneficial for underserved communities, but criticized for high costs and regulatory challenges. It was further acknowledged for its potential to benefit communities and alleviate energy poverty, but concerns were raised obviously about the costs, technical suitability, and regulatory hurdles. The township tenant co-op model, it was praised for the energy security and cost savings, but concerns were raised about subsidized feed-in tariffs impacting electricity prices and potential municipal revenue loss. Looking at the community REAP model, it was viewed as a means to mitigate climate change, but questioned for community control and the complexity involved. Yes, seen as beneficial for stable energy supply and financial returns, but concerns emerged regarding community control and complexities around land tenure and ownership. The worker-owned model was supported for empowering workers and generating income, but there was potential conflict and management capacity were concerns that were raised. The analysis of findings indicated a preference for Model 1 and 2, with doubts around Model 3, particularly concerning communal land ownership. Concerns were also raised about the regulatory environment, especially for grid-tied models. Overall, tailored regulations and community-centric approaches were emphasized to ensure equitable and sustainable outcomes in a renewable energy projects, stressing collaboration, education, and flexibility as well. And just a quick analysis also on, of findings per key stakeholder, also revealed that despite support for the transition, different opinions persist in terms of ownership, the role of state, the transition pace, also necessitating collaboration for a just and sustainable transition. If we look specifically at the Climate Justice Coalition, they call for a just transition to a socially owned renewable energy powered economy, with ESCOM playing a central role. They also emphasize social ownership by workers, cooperatives, communities, municipalities, and the state, and prioritizing benefits for people over multinational companies. Looking at the Climate Justice Charter movement, they advocate for socialized ownership of energy production as opposed to benefiting corporations, foreign investment, and loans from advanced economies. They support decentralized renewable energy projects by workers or communities. Organized labor, they broadly support socially owned renewables and worker-owned approaches with a focus on worker training and absorption into the renewable energy sector. They further emphasize the unity of workers, prioritization of socioeconomic concerns, and inclusion in the decision-making to make that model a success for them. They absolutely oppose privatization. Business and industry are willing to collaborate with social and community partners for market expansion and acknowledge potential economic and educational benefits of engaging with renewable energy sources, for communities especially. They also emphasized, that the localization of value chains and support for manufacturing of renewable components, it's quite critical. So they did highlight that there is opportunity around that as well. From government and municipalities, they recognize the importance of renewable energy projects being included in ward development plans and IDPs, the importance of having buy-in of councillors for planning purposes, land zoning, land infrastructure maintenance as well. They acknowledge that the shift to renewable energy could lower energy production costs. We'll hand over to Prof. Just for an overview of findings from the work program.
Yeah, thank you. So just to recap on how we put together the models and how we devised a work program, what we called I'm not quite sure, I think it was the Presidential Climate Commission which actually used this term, a work program. So we weren't quite sure what this meant, but we interpreted it as to put together a proposal for a viable development of each of these models. And we set criteria for the models as we developed them. So they needed to meet our definition of social ownership, to have stakeholder support, to be technically feasible, to be replicable or scalable, to be economically or financially viable or fundable, which not necessarily both, and to fall in line with the government and international policy guidelines. So our 4 models, I'm not going to go in detail into the modeling here, but we have Patrick Brennan, who is online, who developed the modeling for us in terms of the financial viability, the amount of energy that could be produced, etc., for each model. But the first one, the mini grid, is for rural households, village, typical South African village in a former homeland area. But we also developed this model for informal settlements in urban areas. And basically, it's for energy access for people who are not on grid or in situations where it's difficult or expensive for them to be connected to the national grid. And yeah, we thought this would have a very significant impact in terms of rural development or in terms of informal settlement, sustainable development, both economic and social, in terms of access to electricity, which I think people understand. I want you to just go through the models quickly. The grid-tied township cooperative model is based on a pilot project which we have been running in KwaZulu in Nelson Mandela Bay. And the idea here is to have feed into the municipal grid And if this was done at scale across a whole township, we can argue, and we've modeled this as well, that it could provide a significant proportion of the city's energy needs, including contributing to the needs of industries. So Nelson Mandela Bay, for example, this relates to the auto industry, which is going through the transition to renewable energy, electric vehicles, production of batteries, all these important changes, which is going to completely restructure the motor industry. And rather than seeing this as a threat, we saw this as an opportunity. And we looked, for example, at a model of a medium-sized factory, which could be a motor component factory, which is what we actually modeled for. And that could have a worker-owned PV solar installation on the factory. So yeah, that it would be linked to the factory transitioning in terms of its carbon commitments, carbon reduction commitments, as well as providing workers with an asset that they could contribute to that transition and benefit, of course, financially from that. We thought it would be quite interesting to look at how trade union pension funds, for example, could contribute to that, and how that we could build cooperative relationships between the motor industry cluster and labor. However, this model, we would also say, could apply for mining as well. So it was not exclusively related to the auto industry. Then the community land REAP, this is obviously referring to the current renewable energy independent power producer procurement program, and how with one of our members, Hall of Locus, who's done extensive evaluation of how the REAP program has worked in the past, and looked at how we could expand the level of community ownership. So we're looking at community land, i.e. land which is owned through communal land ownership, community property associations, or under traditional leadership, or under land redistribution or land restitution programs. And rather than benefiting private commercial farmers, this model would benefit the owners of that communal land, and would be a considerable charge for rural development in that context. Again, there are some complexities to this, and it would require considerable investment, but with the positive side of the REAP program, as we've seen it to date, you know, we would combine the revenue from that, let's say a share, a percentage of the profit through shareholding, together with rental for the company. Okay, so these things all require further detail, but the benefits are pretty clear. So we looked at these 4 models in relation to the first one being a social public partnership with municipalities in rural areas, and in terms of their plans for development of informal settlements, provision of services to informal settlements. The second model, we looked at a social public partnership with municipalities, critically working together with municipalities to develop smart grids, feed-in tariffs, ways in which they can work with cooperatives in townships to make sure that everybody benefits from this. Alleviate the fears of municipalities about losing revenue because they're no longer selling electricity, because people are generating it for themselves. I'm sort of crudifying the argument, but we have modeled this to demonstrate that it's possible for it to be beneficial to both the municipality and to the residents. And then the community land one obviously is a social private partnership, because it's based on investment of these large renewable energy companies running wind farms and so on, as they are at the moment, but responding more in more depth to rural communal landowners. And interestingly, we thought politically this could link very nicely with demands for land redistribution and restitution. But it's a bit complex, but it can be done. And then the last one is, as I said, would respond to the fears of labor about the transition, that they will lose income, they will lose through the transition in the auto industry, the mining industry, that they will lose jobs. But in fact, this is a response to that, which is also meeting the needs of industry and responding to the imperative for industrial transformation as well. So that's also a social private partnership. Labor, of course, trade unions would be critical to that. And yeah, I think I've addressed actually the comparative benefit, but we have modeled that also with some data as well. So if people wanted to see that, it's in the report. So I'm going to just ask Mareka to quickly go through the recommendations about regulations and funding and capacity.
Thank you, Prof. I think based on the integration of findings from the lead review consultations and work programs, the following recommendations were put forward. Recommendations for funding identified potential to unlock various funding sources, including, seeking some financial support from National Treasury and municipalities. A proposition regarding increased corporate social investment in socially owned renewable energy projects that should include specific requirements and responsibilities towards communities they aim to benefit as well. For Model 3, specifically, as Prof has indicated, the study identified potential of land assets to be leveraged, but this obviously will require further investigation and consultations. And then the REAP model, through the public-private partnership with the communities. For Model 4 specifically, there was potential for trade union investment arms and pension funds to be used. And yes, this will also obviously require further investigation and consultations for that. And there were some concerns around this. I think the biggest concerns was on the accountability in relation to the loan agreements, as exemplified by the instance of the Komati plant in Mpumalanga. There was also the concern around lack of transparency in loans from international finance institutions that was highlighted by stakeholders. And this lack of public oversight raised concerns about the country's obligations without adequate representation. They also, in the study also, identified significant obstacle to achieve a meaningful just transition because of inadequate funding allocation for social ownership within the JET implementation plan as well. So collectively, I think these perspectives on finance, they underscored the complexity of securing funding for socially owned renewable energy initiatives. There's highlighting obviously the need for careful consideration of funding sources, the mechanisms for those funds, and transparency to ensure effective and equitable implementation. In terms of the national and municipal policy formulation and implementation, there's consensus that emerged with regards to tailored and progressive regulations, which are essential to ensuring equitable and sustainable outcomes. There's a need for a holistic, community-centered approaches, emphasizing education, collaboration, and flexibility to ensure the success of socially owned renewables and to foster a just and sustainable transition to a cleaner energy source. There was also recommendation for an urgent need to ensure significant work to speed up and scale up renewable energy generation in South Africa, potentially to be combined with social ownership. You know, there is concern about the fact that it's not going fast enough and it needs to be speeded up. So the discussions around the policy frameworks, they underscore the intricate web of regulations, policies, and challenges that must be navigated to enable effective social ownership of renewable energy projects. On the regulatory mechanisms, they need to adjust national legislation to better align with social renewables. And secondly, the Electricity Regulation Act and NESA to be revamped for compatibility with these SOR models. The revenue model for municipalities should introduce innovative incentives, and obviously this needs further investigation in terms of how. The Municipal Systems Act and distribution licenses pose challenges for implementation in villages and rural areas. So there is a need to relook that as well in terms of how do we enable for mini-grids, especially to be implemented in these areas. There is also the possibility of redirecting the free basic electricity subsidy towards supporting socially owned renewables. And yeah, we had a very robust internal discussions, I think, around the issue of free basic electricity. And I'm sure that, you know, from comments and questions, they will probably come through in terms of how do we ensure that this is, or find mechanisms of redirecting FBE, and especially because we still have a large number of people not benefiting from FBE. So the highlight is that empowerment and consultations must be prioritized to ensure inclusivity and knowledge parity among stakeholders when it comes to the regulatory mechanisms. Capacity building is quite key, and there is a need to have dedicated training programs that will be directed or targeted to municipal officials to ensure that there is some understanding around socially owned renewables. And this could include for electricity departments, economic development, IDP, and SCM, etc. And also dedicated programs for communities, labor, and traditional authorities as the social owners of these renewables, you know, so that they can also understand the accrued benefits and, you know, manage expectations in terms of how SOR will work. In terms of developing a generic modeling tool, you know, we used this to model the different scenarios as well, you know, for the framework that was developed. And it needs to be accessible as a toolbox for stakeholders. This will ensure that, you know, there is greater understanding of the models and enable a, you know, co-designing and implementation of the projects as well. And just overall recommendations for the work program is that immediate support should be given to two models. The social public partnership, model 2, and the motivation here is that there is existing pilots with a relationship between the social entity and a municipality. And also the second main recommendation is for model 4. It's for model 4, And the motivation here is that it's important to win the buy-in of organized labor by providing the benefit of renewable energy for their membership. And I know that organized labor, they are quite excited about this model, you know, despite obviously raising, you know, their concerns in terms of the mechanisms for implementing that. It was further recommended that additional research and consultations be funded to identify appropriate contexts and sites for piloting or supporting of models 1A, which is the rural mini-grid. And already in the Eastern Cape, there are, you know, one successful mini-grid that is being implemented, and across the country as well, you know, in Gauteng, there are several mini-grid projects that are being implemented as well. And then also including the community land RIP, using the process as we set out in the work program for each model. The PCC, it was also recommended for the PCC to support the establishment of SOAR community of practice to guide the implementation of the pilot projects, and the proposed composition of this COP to include representatives from identified stakeholder categories for each model as well. And just some concluding remarks, Prof, I don't know if you want to close it off. We have only two, Jacques, we only have two slides left and we are done.
Let me just finish off. Thanks, Marika. So we really just felt that everybody, policymakers, municipalities, civil society stakeholders, need to be more ambitious in this project, in realizing it. And rather than seeing this as a threat, especially we identified labor and municipalities who see renewable energy as a threat in some way. It should be seen as an opportunity. It can solve both the energy crisis and the crisis of economic inequality, and in that way become a really just transition to a more equal economy as well. If I can just acknowledge, if you can just go on to the acknowledgements, Marika, the last slide is just to say we really thank NEDLAC and the PCC, both the PCC staff and their commissioners, our SteerCom members, for their insights and input into this. And our team, which included, I think the ones who are online at the moment, is Prof. Berndt, who's from Oldenburg, and Dr. Holle Vlokas from Inspire. I don't think she's online today, she can't make it. But Irina Senekal is available, and also Patrick Brennan, who are online. And we had Maureen Chudisane and Likaya Ngrizana, both who have experience in local government, and our Irina from, she's from Nelson Mandela University, and Tony Martel, who's not able to be with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just lastly, maybe just not to forget our stakeholders. We really appreciate, I think, the opportunity that you provided us, you know, your time and the effort, you know, to participate in the study. And we hope that we managed to capture your perspectives, you know, correctly. We did not misrepresent you. And we look forward, I think, to engaging further with those key stakeholders that we have formed already a network. There's a network and a relationship that has already been established now with them. Thank you so much.
Prof. Janet, Marika, thank you so much for the insightful report. It's always nice dealing with academics because you make our journey easier when you publish the recommendations and some foods for thought. So thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move into the next part of our agenda for today, let me just quickly just acknowledge everybody that's on board this morning. I know there were some challenges with connectivity, load shedding amongst others. So a big welcome to everybody that's on board this morning, both to the fellow commissioners in the PCC. Good morning to all of you. And the staff of PCC that's also joined. Big welcome to you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the exciting part where we've invited a number of industry leaders to engage on the report and what we will do in terms of process. I'm going to introduce all four of them just now. They will each have an opportunity to give some reflection in terms of the report and then possibly pose a question or two. We will go through all four of the respondents and then allow and request the team of Prof to then tackle those questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, in no particular order, Dr. Silas, he's from Salga. Good morning and welcome. He's going to be our first speaker. And at his conclusion, I would then invite to the platform Monica Naiker, just trying to do this in terms of saving some time. And then Lebogang, she's from the Netlac Community Constituency. And then Terry Alban from NCASA. Good morning to all of you and welcome. Dr. Silas, I now hand over the platform to you. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, good morning, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm basically going to switch off the video due to bandwidth issues. I'm on load shedding right now. Otherwise, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this session and obviously to share our insight as local government with regard to this particular report. So yes, maybe firstly I need to also clarify from some of the remarks that local government is scared about the revenue that there won't be as much purchase of electricity to municipalities once some of these projects are online, which is absolutely not correct. But anyway, I will allude to that as I go on with my remarks. So firstly, Chair, to acknowledge that as local government, we took a resolution around 2018 in the summit that as local government summit that we are of the view that the electricity supply and distribution in its current form is no longer viable, is no longer profitable, obviously for many reasons. And of course, we advocated for regulation changes, which we've seen ever since 2020, a lot of changes in the regulations and have been experienced, and which is good, which is what we advocated for. And obviously, we have said new electricity distribution models are required as part of transition. Therefore, this talks to decentralization of the energy system, which when you look at these proposed models, they are all in the name of decentralization of renewable energy as part of transition. And obviously, we do support that. So this is again also within the background of the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, where we are well aware that the target is by 2030, everybody must have access to modern electricity or modern energy, so to speak. And nevertheless, in the sub-Saharan, we are not doing very well. However, in South Africa, the picture is slightly different from many of our sub-Saharan counterparts, in a sense that our electrification rate is quite much higher than many of our neighbors in the region. So why I'm saying that is precisely because of the fact that I think Prof also alluded to it, that we are at around plus or minus 89, 90, 91% electrification rate, meaning that there is still plus or minus 10% of the population in our country that do not have electricity. And who are these? Some of this population are in areas where the geographic landscape is really not conducive for the national grid to reach, meaning that it can be much more costly. Therefore, the models that have been presented here talk to that. Many of them are really quite may come in handy to some of the areas that are still not yet electrified. So that is basically the position from the local government. We do support the different models as long as they speak to energy transition, as long as they speak to decentralization of the energy source. So why did I say we're not opposing to decentralization or to customer-owned generation? It's precisely because of the fact that we realize that customers are basically installing for own generation in many ways. In any case, they won't buy as much electricity as they would from the municipalities or from the distributors, which is the same with ESCOM as a distributor. So we support embedded generation. Many of the municipalities do have embedded generation processes in place where the generators will need to register with the municipalities and, of course, sell surplus power to the municipalities at a rate, at an export tariff that we will pay to them, and then buy electricity and sell to the next customer. So yes, the grid-tied model 2, we agree with the recommendation for model 2 and model 4. Why I'm saying also model 4, worker SSEG, precisely because of a different energy business model that we advocate for. One of them being that the number of municipalities that are looking at utilizing the facilities, private facilities to install PV, generate and sell to the very same customer as part of embedded. So the difference with this is that model 4 talk to where they work hard themselves or industry install this for own use and then sell surplus or feed surplus to the municipal distribution, which we all agree, fully agree with the model 4, is what we advocate for, is what we are seeing across the country in different municipalities, that let's have the processes in place to allow embedded generators to feed back surplus power to our distribution network, because obviously of the obvious reasons that we don't have sufficient generation capacity in the country. So that's basically what we support and fully agree with the recommendations for model 2 and 4. Nevertheless, a question, Chair, as you said, we may also pose. And of course, it's reflected in the report. Good projects, not projects, mini grid projects that I believe you have learned a lot of lessons. You have no Lutlingweni, which I think is also referenced in your report. There were a lot of lessons that were learned from that particular project. And obviously, when you say this, you will need further investigation. I would wonder exactly what exactly is that, because there were a lot of lessons that were learned, and we believe that the next mini grid should be by far much better than what happened to Lutlingweni, the hybrid, the wind and solar PV project that was installed years ago, over 20 years ago in the Eastern Cape. My question would be, what exactly that you still need to learn from that? One of the recommendations, Chair, was issues around funding, and that is quite true. I wanted to check, when you talk about funding, which is a good point, and I believe that for as long as the project is bankable, for as long as the project is investment ready, for as long as there is very good preparation facility that is actually spot on and actually good and comprehensive in terms of bankability, surely funding should be easily be accessible, as opposed to a project where there is no proper preparation facility done. So my question is that in your different models, did you consider that? Is it that done, or the future work that you are referring to? Is it a preparation facility or project preparation facility in order to ensure the bankability and attract investors in such kind of project? So in conclusion, Chair, I would want to say around technical viability, yes, my input is that, yes, solar is a proven technology. It has been working over the years, and I do not see any reason around or doubt around technical viability of this project, provided the structures are in place. And I've seen that through the slides that Prof and the other colleague, Marika, presented, that a lot of stakeholders that were actually consulted, and obviously a lot of them do acknowledge the transition and decentralization. And once again, local government does appreciate and acknowledge decentralization. We are open to that. We are seeing that we've got processes in place. You can generate from any of this model, and if you wish to feedback surplus to our grid, yes, by all means, we have got tariffs, export tariffs in place where we can do that. You have seen with the Western Cape, rather city of Cape Town, that now they're actually implementing the embedded generation to the residential customers, which they will give them cashback equivalent to the kilowatt hour that will be fed back to the city of Cape Town distribution grid. Yeah, so that's basically my inputs as well as my question, Chair. I hope I'm not beyond the time provided. Thank you.
Doc, you're well within time, and thank you for keeping to the time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to welcome to the platform Monica Nijker from BUSA. Monica, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Mona from Business Unity South Africa, and this is our reflections on the social ownership models in the energy transition report and how business can start supporting these initiatives, especially linked to the work-owned model. We believe that the social ownerships model in the energy report is a significant step towards achieving a just and sustainable energy future. The report responds to the Just Transition Framework's call for affordable, decentralized, diversely owned renewable energy systems. It emphasizes the importance of broadening ownership of productive means to support the just transition. The transitions towards sustainable and renewable energy encompasses more than just assets. It embodies a fundamental shift in economic activities leading to the emergence of new sectors and job opportunities. However, it is imperative to recognize that assets alone cannot sustain themselves in this transition. There's a pressing need to reimagine financial instruments and facilities to bolster the SOAR approach effectively. Additionally, supporting this transition requires a diverse array of skills, many of which may not traditionally be found within the communities targeted by SOAR initiatives. Therefore, fostering inclusive skill development is paramount to ensuring the success and long-term viability of sustainable energy endeavors. The focus on social ownership as a means to pave the way for a more inclusive and empowering approach to energy generation. The report explores various models of social ownership of renewable energy that align with the just transition imperative. These models aim to ensure that communities and workers have a real say in the transition and become primary beneficiaries of energy production. Among the study's key findings are the 4 potential models for social ownership of renewable energy. Business can play a crucial role in supporting these initiatives. In terms of investment, businesses can invest in social ownership projects contributing to the development of community-owned renewable energy systems. However, the basic fundamentals of economics and business must apply. There must be a return on investment, and the net positive gains must be sustainable for the communities so as to not create a dependent community that is surviving off goodwill and charity, even though capital has been invested. Partnering with local communities and cooperatives can foster shared ownership and ensure a fair distribution of benefits. Businesses can advocate for policies that promote social ownership and encourage a just transition as a way to diversify local communities, build reliance for businesses in those communities, and incentivize development or integration with local, national, international supply chains. Supporting capacity building programs for community members can empower them to actively participate in energy programs. The work-owned model specifically involves employees of already established companies having ownership stakes in the energy-producing entity. This may not be appropriate for SOAR-targeted locations as there may be no energy development company to speak of, so the modality may be of a new company being owned by workers, in which this case renders workers as owners of the company as people. A clearer distinction of what we mean by worker-owned is necessary because around the world and in South Africa have employed stock ownership plans, ESOPs, or similar structures to promote ownership. Many with great results, such as with Heineken as early as 2023. It must be noted that ESOPs have been used more in the context of broad-based Black economic empowerment. In summary, businesses can support local ownership models by investing, collaborating, and promoting such initiatives. Together, we can create a more sustainable landscape. Between current business appetite and the emerging interest in sustainable and renewable energy and worker-owned renewable energy alternatives, it is crucial to recognize the varying priorities and concerns it plays. Businesses still prioritize fundamental aspects such as risk reduction and profitability pathways, which may not always align seamlessly with SOAR and war initiatives. Specifically for war ventures, the dynamic shifts. If it's a new business, traditional worker roles may evolve, blurring the lines of traditional employment structures. Conversely, if the business is established, partnership in shareholding may deviate from standard practices, influencing governance dynamics. Similarly, SOAR initiatives pose significant political and commercial risks, particularly due to the absence of a robust capital base within communities. Ownership disputes among community members further compound these risks, necessitating a nuanced understanding of governance structures and decision-making processes. Therefore, clarity is paramount in project objectives and structures. Key considerations include distinguishing between new ventures and acquisitions of established businesses, outlining sustainable operational plans, demonstrating pathways to profitability, and establishing transparent governance frameworks. Only with such clarity can stakeholders navigate the complexity inherent in SOAR and war initiatives and ensure their long-term success. Furthermore, the social ownership models in the Energy Transition Report highlights the significance of alternate ownership structures in achieving a sustainable and equitable energy transition. Specifically, the worker-owned model has garnered attention as a means of fostering social responsibility and improving environmental, social, and governance outcomes. Businesses' overall appetite for implementing a pilot of the worker-owned model aligns with the report's findings. Businesses are increasingly interested in exploring alternative models. The worker-owned model, which involves employees holding a significant ownership stake, is gaining interest. Research indicates that employee-owned companies tend to outperform their peers in ESG standards. These firms demonstrate a strong commitment to environmental protection, sustainable practices, and quality disclosure of environmental impact information. Proponents argue that worker ownership leads to increased productivity and better employee engagement. When employees have a stake in the company, they are more motivated to contribute to its success. While the worker-owned model offers advantages, these kinds of businesses must address unique challenges. These include governance complexities, decision-making processes, and balancing employee interests with business goals, bankability, return on investment, and transparent practices. Employee ownership is not a one-size-fits-all model. SOAR or worker-owned businesses can tailor their plans to their specific needs, considering factors like company size, industry, and organizational culture. Implementing worker ownership can contribute to community wealth and energy democracy. It aligns with the concept of just energy transitions, emphasizing diverse ownership of new electricity generation assets and increased community participation in energy investments and infrastructure. Businesses' appetite for piloting the worker-owned model is influenced by factors such as risk tolerance, strategic alignment, leadership vision, and stakeholder engagement. As companies seek sustainable and socially responsible practices, exploring worker ownership becomes a compelling avenue for positive change. The report also underscores the importance of community ownership in energy transition. Businesses recognize that empowering local communities to own and manage renewable energy assets can lead to a more resilient and sustainable system, including new business opportunities. Opportunities also lie in fostering partnerships with communities, cooperatives, and indigenous groups to jointly develop and operate energy projects. Social ownership models promote decentralization of energy production. Businesses view this as an opportunity to enhance energy resilience by reducing reliance on centralized grids while encouraging energy democracy. Microgrids, community solar installations, and local energy cooperatives are avenues for achieving this. The worker-owned model aligns with businesses' commitment to inclusive growth. By involving employees in ownership, companies contribute to wealth distribution and address income inequality. Opportunities arise from designing employee stock option plans and profit-sharing mechanism. In terms of risk mitigation, diversifying ownership mitigates risks associated with energy transitions. Business recognizes that relying solely on large corporations or government entities is risky. South Africa needs more small to medium enterprises of all kinds to participate in all sectors of the economy. Social ownership models can reduce the impact of system shocks and unpredictable regulatory changes. Implementing social ownerships require active engagement with stakeholders. Businesses see opportunities in collaborating with local governments, NGOs, and community leaders. Jointly developing energy projects ensures alignment with community needs. Social ownership also aligns with businesses' CSR goals. Companies view it as an avenue to demonstrate commitment to environmental and social well-being. Opportunities lie in integrating social ownership initiatives into existing CSR strategies. Businesses can advocate for policies that support social ownership by the creation of enabling policy environment and access to tailor-made financial tools. Opportunities exist to engage with policymakers, lobby for incentives, and shape regulations. A favorable policy environment encourages communities to invest in their own energy projects by resource mobilizing in a variety of ways. Social ownership models can contribute to the long-term viability of the energy sector. Businesses recognize that sustainable energy systems require active participation from diverse stakeholders. Opportunities arise from fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility among all involved parties. In summary, businesses perceive social ownership models as pathways to a more equitable, resilient, and sustainable energy landscape. By actively supporting these initiatives, companies can drive positive change while ensuring their own long-term success. Thank you.
Magna, thank you for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, we then move on to Lebogang. She's from the Netlak community constituency. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacques. Good morning, everyone. Happy International Women's Day today. And thank you to the panelists, the commissioners who are here, and our chairperson. As we said, my name is Lebogang Dita. I'm a member of the Netlak community constituency. It's important to stress that we are a very diverse community. As a community constituency, that includes the Women's National Coalition, Sanako, Nkasa, the Financial Sector Campaign Coalition, the Youth Council, etc., and Sanko. I think as a starting point, we welcome the report. Some of our members were active in some of those consultations that have been referred to. As a community constituency, we've always said that we would support citizens as active participants in their development. And we think solving a critical issue for our communities, such as load shedding, is something that requires all hands on deck. We welcome the report. We have said we've had a look at the different models. As I said, some of our members have been involved in projects that have used this, particularly the community mini grid that is mentioned in Model 1. As you can see from the report, we essentially see all four as mini grids. It's a question of whether they are off-grid or linked to the grid. That is not of primary importance to us because it depends on the community that is being served. One of the earlier speakers mentioned the fact that there are communities who are not connected to the grid yet, and of course you'd use the appropriate model for them. However, a large majority of our communities are in areas where there is a grid, and they work under different, dispensation, if you like. So it is for that reason that I think from our perspective, we welcome the idea of putting together a community of practice. There are a number of pilots that have been mentioned in the report. We think it's important to learn from those lessons. We have a number of communities that are keen to start piloting as well. And in their journey in trying to find both partners and establishing the type of model that is appropriate to them, we think something like a community of practice run out of the PCC would be of great help. This enables people to not only test which model is appropriate for them, but also to learn lessons. There are communities that have been involved in the community RIPPs that were mentioned earlier, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned there as well. And some of them, unfortunately, not very good ones. And we can go into that with the PCC. I don't want to belabor that point, but one of the things that was highlighted when we did our consultation was that a number of the earlier kind of community share ownership into an RIPP have the communities themselves have not seen benefits, financial benefit, that is. That is something that we need to learn from. We need to know what some of the problems were in those cases. So a community of practice would enable us to thresh out some of those issues. We also, one of the groups that have been interested in setting up a mini grid have raised the issue of the ability to know what your municipal dispensation is. We welcome the input from SAGA, but our lived experience on the ground is that it's very difficult for an average cooperative without the necessary support to know the dispensation that their municipality is under. Even with a ward council in place, there are still impediments. So a community of practice for us solves these issues. This is a good beginning in terms of setting out the type of models that are possible. However, context is important. In some cases, you do have a township, you've got a piece of land which is available that can be done, but the level of conflict in a sub-community then renders the project not to even get off the ground. So it's important that we set up structures to be able to assist with those type of issues. Devon mentioned stokvels, which are obviously close to my heart because a lot of the people that we deal with are participants in those. And the model there is a very bottom-up approach. It's a self-governing, it's a community-governed, and the community itself has a sense in terms of which groups will work and which ones will not. We think that a bottom-up approach is very important to take into account. There are many benefits to this, to rolling out renewable energy, but we mustn't forget that we are also, for a lot of people, it is solving a very basic issue of load shedding and the effect that that has in terms of accessing education, accessing livelihood, and of course, exposing you to crime, not having power. We have a group of ladies that are sitting in Orlando, for example, that wanted to join this, Orlando East in Soweto, that wanted to join this webinar. They were not able to join because a cable has been stolen in their area. So even accessing this type of information is a problem because we have a webinar, we're trying to get information out, but unfortunately crime has rendered the information not possible. With regard to funding, we've seen a number of solutions here. Maraka, I think, mentioned the CSI. We think there's an opportunity to also, in addition to CSI, to use the socioeconomic development budget in corporates, the enterprise supply development budget as well. That is quite a substantial, if you take those two into account in a lot of these BE scorecards, that is a substantial amount. we think there's an opportunity to use that in terms of funding. Lastly, on capacity building, yes, again, I will stress the community of practice. Capacity building is important so that communities are not reliant on the technical partner to come with a solution. We really, really need to move away from almost treating communities only as beneficiaries. They need to be active participants in their development, and they also need to have access to a fair amount of information so that in the negotiation itself, in trying to put together a solution, people are better informed. We would urge the Commission to move with speed. There is nothing wrong with failing. We need a lot more pilots, and a couple of them are going to fail, and that's what happens. But the reality is the need out there is so dire, and the capacity to learn lessons in the actual rolling out of a project is also important in trying to get to a model. So the models, as they sit, apply differently to different communities, but we'll start to see iterations of the different models once they're actually on the ground, and also learn what's working and what's not working. Let me pause there. Thank you, Chairperson.
Lebogang, thank you so much. Thank you for your input, and also a big thank you for keeping to time. So I see we're running out of time later today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to invite to the platform, the virtual platform, Terry Alban. He's from NCASA. And without any further ado, Terry, platform is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Is my microphone on? Okay, so first of all, welcome everybody, and the presence of decision makers on that way. And a very good facilitation. Thank you very much. Also, the fact that we are in presence of organizations who have absolute resonance with NCASA, which are, and I'm not afraid to give names. I think we have totally appreciated the presentation of Devan Pillay on cooperative. Very, very good knowledge of what really a cooperative is. And just Lebogang, also Lebogang, sorry about my pronunciation, Lebogang or Lebogang. We have a lot of resonance with each other. And this is one of the things that Devan was talking about, is the change of mindset. And of course, I would like to precise that NCASA is a privileged and very tight partner of the National MAGIC Initiative, which stands for Municipal Applied Green Initiative and Concept. We've been working with COP since 2014 and putting a lot of models together. And we are going to thank the person that was dedicated to work with the University of Mandela, George Darras. Thank you very much, George, if you're around. And then we would like to make this presentation an innovative and unique platform to talk about certain issues that are emerging from that report. So the quality of the report is exceptional because it highlights very important aspects that have never been dealt with before. Okay? So that is innovation, and we're going to talk about this. First of all, our national initiative is called the SAIC, which is a South African Integrity Initiatives. If you want to talk about decentralized, we have to talk about sovereignty. It works together. Yes. Do you want,
no, I just
want
wanted
to talk to me about something?
Yes, my apology for interrupting. I just wanted to ask you to switch off your camera just to allow some bandwidth because the microphone is a bit stop and go. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. So now one of the first things that we want to talk about very, very importantly is that the normal mindset is to talk about collaboration we are wanting to talk about cooperation. It's very, very different. And I let the people to try to find out what's the difference between the two methods. Second one, on the climate justice, we have to enter a very important aspect that is linked to funding, which is to access the current notions of retribution and compensation, and not just CSI. Because CSI is a very voluntary, very loose and uncontrollable type of environment, where now you've got systems which are obligatory and mandatory on retribution and compensation. Then we would like to also say that, like Lebogang was saying about crime, for example, when you're talking about electricity in informal settlement, etc., we have to look at something that South Africans have called izinyoka, which means they are taking the electricity without really paying for it, etc. And all these kind of things have to be addressed, and it's part of the mandate that we all have to actually either organize the izinyoka or to make a solution for it. That's a very important thing. The second thing, extremely important, is renewable energy is not about only electricity. Electricity becomes not very relevant in many of those communities, because it can be replaced by very easy renewable energy that nobody has really looked into, except for what we are doing now. It's biogas. Biogas is an incredible renewable energy that is practiced all over the world and replace electricity when it comes to cooking and hot water and all these kind of things. So that's, for us, is a very important aspect that we have to come in. Then also the other aspect of renewable energy is solar. And we want to announce for the first time in South Africa, a cooperative in renewable energy is manufacturing their own solar panels, unique invention and localized technology. So now it starts by saying that if we want to be sovereign, we have to own the means of production. And the way to do it is that cooperative must own the manufacturing of those solar panels, the assembling of it, the installation of it, the maintenance of it, and also the recycling of the materials that you are taking off to replace it with these new technologies. So that's an aspect that has never been sort of really highlighted. And then the mega understanding of energy is that the free energy that we have, and nobody really consider it in a mindset, it's called photosynthesis. It means a transformation of carbon and oxygen into cellulose. And cellulose can be transformed immediately in energy in many different technologies. The fourth one is we must never forget waste to energy. Away from biodigesters, there's a lot of methodologies to transform waste to energy. So all these kind of things are methodological, and CASA is extremely supportive and encouraging the magic community of practice on energy to do that. Now, you see, what we believe also is that the model of workers, in particular in Mpumalanga, where there is a threat to them, but we see it like the panel of the University of Mandela. We can actually have a total revolution in Mpumalanga by treating the waste coal and transform it into real good energy. And of course, we've developed a model, we've developed a technology, etc. So there must not be no threat to the workers' people, because they can own this immediately. It's a very easy technology, very easy friendly, and also it can cover the whole province. But the most important aspect is the relationship of municipalities. And you are very 100% right. But they see many of our initiatives as a threat to them. Well, when we are getting the model of sovereignty and you design the municipality to be sovereign in renewable energy, it will be an incredible opportunity for them to become IPP producers of renewable energy, and most of it will go to electricity. It's not the panel to talk about the different methods that we are using, but these kind of things are extremely important. Okay, then I think we totally agree with Devon about the fact that we need a dedicated training program, education program, capacity building program, mentorship program, and coaching program, because the baseline of the knowledge about renewable energy and its application and governance and structuring doesn't really exist in the country at the level of the community and the municipality. So that's a little bit of an input that we have onto this. And then we would like to say that you can just see that we are going to be within our 10 minutes input. And I can see Jacques smiling to say that, hey, this Frenchman is not talking so much, he's respecting time. So he must be an engineer. And we do have a lot of engineers. And then also, we are developing a model in the skills called the Centers of Excellence, which we have to speak about with the university and with the PCC, because this is a holistic system to link anything to do with renewable energy by centers of excellence, where you pass that knowledge to people who really will benefit and will become productive forces behind the skill that they got imparted with. And thank you very much, everybody. Mr. Hugo, I like your smile, and therefore I'm going to be saying I'm stopping now. And I apologize about my English speaking is not really great, but I'm an old South African, so I haven't lost my accents. Like Afrikaners, they still have an accent. The Zulus still have an accent, so we apologize on behalf of my accent. But I'm from Africa, I'm from Morocco. So yeah, thank you, bye.
Terry, thank you so much, and thank you for your insightfulness and review of the report. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to move on to the next part of our agenda. And I'm firstly going to allow Prof. Janet and her team just to address. There were a couple of questions, but I think more comments and support for the report, Prof. So well done. But I think there were a couple of questions. And as discussed, I'm going to hand over to you and your team just to quickly address those questions. Ladies and gentlemen, after the conclusion of these answers to the questions posed, I will then open the floor for questions from the floor as well. So everybody would have an opportunity, time cognizant. Thank you, Prof.
Great. Phil, firstly, thank you to all the respondents for your positive support and also for the very, very useful input that you've given and suggestions for the way forward. So I think there's some quite detailed suggestions which we should take up. I don't want to spend too much time responding to them here, but let me work backwards from Terry. I'm really excited about the support for the cooperative models, and I picked up that you talked about restitution and compensation and how that could be built into the private sector's response to the energy transition. We actually didn't pick that up in the report, but it's a really important addition to it. The issue about illegal connections is absolutely critical to pilot in the urban mini grid model, that people actually own the electricity system themselves and benefit from it and take control of it. The issue of hybrid or biogas is also really important. And we had another possible pilot, which was the mini grid pilot, which was a hybrid model using biogas actually generated through a biodigester linked to an alternative sewage system, but we've never been able to get buy-in for that at all. So those are all very, very helpful. In terms of Lebogang and NEDLAC's community constituency position, thank you very much for the support for the community of practice and the willingness to pilot some of these things more extensively. We really need to do that. We did acknowledge that the REAP program has not had financial benefits to date, and exactly what we wanted to pilot is something which will change that model. And yeah, dealing with conflict in communities, essential to develop the structures properly and democratically and transparently, and so on. These things are really difficult. I mean, we have one pilot in KwaZulu Township, and we've confronted all of these problems here. We've also looked at the mini grid pilots in rural areas and how they have dealt with these problems as well. But I think the critical point that you made is, that we've got to move away from treating communities as beneficiaries, and actually they become owners. And I think this was also supported strongly by Thierry, that people can actually own the productive assets themselves. So, and that makes a difference in how people relate to those assets. So if they're owned by the municipality or by a company, then they are not looked after by the community in the same way. In terms of the Mona, thank you for Busa's input. I thought you made some critical points about reimagining the financial instruments to support SOAR, and that they have to have a return on investment. They have to actually be sustainable, financially sustainable. In terms of the worker-owned model, what we were thinking about, and I can ask Irina Senekal to speak to this if you want more input, is not workers having the capital to set up a renewable energy company as such, but owning a PV solar facility, which is either on the rooftop of an existing factory, which is a different company producing components for motor vehicles, for example, or separate, in a physically separate from the company, but selling the electricity to the company. So the idea would not, it would be grid tied, but the idea would not be primarily to sell the electricity to the municipality, but to sell it to the company, i.e. the company, it would be a separate worker-owned renewable energy business, which is in partnership with a company, which is a private motor industry company, for example, or a mine. I mean, many mines are set, like Anglo, are setting up huge solar arrays for producing their own energy. And the skills development is obviously critical. The SALGA, Silas, Dr. Silas, it's really, I'm really happy to hear you say strongly that in fact municipalities are welcoming this. But what we found in our pilots is the problem with the feed-in tariff, which is not established in municipalities to allow for ordinary working class residents of townships to benefit from this. So if you, like me, you're a middle class consumer, I've got a solar array on my house, and I can have a feed-in net metering, whatever you call it, with the municipality, where I contribute electricity to the grid and I reduce my bill to zero. I can't even receive payment for it actually as yet. Cape Town apparently has an exemption, but this should be a normal practice that people can receive input for, receive financial benefit from selling to the grid. And that is just simply not established in South Africa at the moment. So we really need to see that facilitated in some major way to allow all residents of every township to become a prosumer. to be able to produce and sell electricity as well as use it. Yeah, so we really need to put that together. And the idea of having, we need some kind of subsidized feed-in tariff, which has worked in other parts of the world, but it is not without controversy as well. So, you know, we have some people arguing that in Europe it hasn't been sustainable in certain countries, but it has definitely worked for a period. Bernd Sevenhane can speak to that if we would like him to give further input on that. So yeah, I don't know, Bernd, do you want to speak to either of those issues? And then Patrick can speak if you want to make a contribution about the models themselves in response, or wait for other questions about that.
Is Irna there?
Yes, we can hear you.
So then I might start and then Irna might take over if that's okay. So thank you for the opportunity and greetings from Germany. Maybe let me briefly comment on what Janet just mentioned. There is this discussion about feed-in tariff systems as supporting schemes for decentralized energy transitions in Europe and worldwide. And Germany has pioneered in that regard with a very high feed-in tariff systems, which created quite a bit of costs for energy consumers. It was not the public money as state budgets, but it was electricity users that paid higher prices, which was also part of the criticism. But the energy transition towards creating a more decentralized and more diversely owned electricity provision has come about quite substantially, and we happily reached now more than 50% of the electricity production in Germany coming from renewables, with the highest share of from wind, and wind was also one key factor for like newly coming up independent power producers like farmers selling and owning the wind farms on their properties, and that created also substantial support for the energy transition. And for acceptance in the sense of putting these wind turbines on the ground. It was only recently and only is happening right now that big businesses come back into the renewable business, so to say, in particular in the offshore field. And that is, of course, controversially discussed. But if we think of offshore wind, that is something that is more distant and higher risk. But big businesses like BP and Total, they paid billions recently to get at least the access to the German market in that regard, and that seems to be of interest. And maybe one last comment on jobs. The recent development I just checked in Germany, they calculate 344,000 jobs created for or in the renewable energy sector. And that's why I found Terry's comment so interesting, including the production of PV, for instance, or wind, and of course the installation and all the provision and the distribution system of electricity. And I very much support the notion of skill development, like training is essential. I think that was mentioned several times. And this element of decentralized ownership, which not only creates or supports the resilience and the risk reduction in the electricity provision, but also in the support for the energy transition in the country. And that's, I think, a good example. But of course, and I think the mentioning by Terry to think of collaboration versus cooperation, I think there needs to be a cooperation also between the municipalities, the governance development, and businesses, and of course the cooperatives themselves, to make this work, as Janet showed in her example in KwaZulu. Thank you.
Prof, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the next part of our agenda this morning. This is now an opportunity for some of our people that have joined to pose some questions to the Prof and her team. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take 3 hands at a stage, then request a team to respond, and we'll see how much time we've got until 12 o'clock. Lindiwe, will you help me to identify any possible hands that I might miss whilst I'm multitasking here?
Yes, I will assist with that. I'm just checking 4 hands.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, I acknowledge the first hand. Motlatsi, you're welcome to take the stand.
Good day, everyone. My name is Motlatsi Makasani. I come from a civil society movement here in the Free State, in a small town called Velkom. So I have more of a comment than maybe it will be a question. That the speed of the transition has left our communities behind. When I was listening to when they were talking about how municipalities should integrate all of this, in my municipality, Machabeng, including the district office, you find that there are climate change action plans are far outdated. Some were developed in 2016 and there's not been reviewed. You find that there's no staff component in municipalities with maybe knowledge of the policy or discussions or legislation that has been talked about. So somehow we find us going backwards instead of moving backwards. Even when there are IDP meetings, you listen to the people when they try and propose what they need for themselves. They come out as more of complaints other than being understanding or how are you going to solve the energy crisis as a community. So they don't even have an understanding when you're talking about the community model, what can they do. Apart from a few of us who attentively attend all of the sessions and understand what's going on, we are unable to transfer or each one teach one to our communities. So that's my comment. That's more of my take of this, and maybe if I could be helpful now, how then are we going to take along our municipalities so that our communities are not this far left behind? Thank you very much.
Yeah, Prof, would you mind to respond? And I think what Motlatsi is highlighting is a challenge that it's not just unique to Machabeng.
Can I ask Marika, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, Prof, thanks. Maybe just quickly, absolutely, I think municipalities, it's a mixed bag, I think, based on provinces. You find that in some provinces, they create awareness in their communities around the just energy transition. And in other provinces, it's really quiet. And you find municipal officials then are uninformed, on how to respond when their communities approach them with such innovative, ideas or projects and so forth. So there is a lot of training, capacity building for municipalities that needs to happen. I think as soon as possible, because the landscape, the just energy transition landscape is moving at such a speed that it's leaving a lot of people behind. I think from the consultations, when they say we need to speed up, I think, the energy transition, it's more on the transformation side of speeding up. We need to catch up with that, but there is a need for capacity building. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there, but we do agree, and we hope that, with our interactions with the civil society organizations, we can tap into that in terms of how then we assist communities in these capacity building initiatives as well.
Thank you, Marika. Ladies and gentlemen, I note 2 further hands. Commissioner Mbodi, you first, and then after Commissioner Mbodi, St. Appleton. Commissioner Mbodi, you've got the floor.
Thank you so very much. I only have got the microphone on. You unfortunately won't see me, but you will hear the point. Look, I think I've seen something in the presentation that is talking about buy-in from the workers. And I thought about it, and I said, I think I need to make an input that the buy-in that is that we are worried about as workers, it's not our own. It's the buy-in of funders. It's buy-in of thought leaders, because we have been contradicted by some thought leaders about the issue of socially owned renewable sector as a part of ownership that goes to workers and the communities. We have had several meetings where some thought leaders indicated how difficult it will be to get funding. So I think maybe the first thing first is the issue of buy-in. It's needed elsewhere than in us as organized labor or workers. Workers don't have any problem with finding ownership as a way of making sure that their livelihoods are safe, even when there should be something that happens through just transition. But my point also is about the speed. I know we are trying to pilot and see how it works. I just hope that the pilot will not be overtaken by events, in that we come to the conclusion of what the pilot can be when there are no opportunities left. So I was gonna put a proposition that maybe wherein there are highly impacted areas like the closure of your coal-fired power station or coal mine, we think we need to move to places of high impact sooner. What I mean by sooner is before closure of such, before closure of a power station, before closure of a coal mine. There should be a way of moving to make sure that this piloting or this work of socially owned renewable sector be taken up where it matters most. I will end there. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Mbodi, thank you for those inputs. St. Appleton, and then after that, we will move to Patrick. That's one of the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, and I think this will conclude the questions that we would have time for this morning. So, St. Appleton, you've got the floor.
Thank you, sir. Welcome Food Energy Water South Africa Tertiary Cooperative, and then we are very grateful to what Prof has presented with regard to cooperatives. Thank you very much, Prof, for that. But the burning question will be as cooperative as to how are we going to access capacity building as well as training on behalf of our cooperatives nationally. We are a tertiary structure existing across the provinces in the form of secondary cooperatives. So those are our challenges, accessing capacity building and as well as training on behalf of members. I thank you.
Appleton, thank you for those inputs. Patrick, we move on to you. You've got the floor. Thank you. Patrick, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Here you are.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say something about the community project that we actually ran, one of the pilot projects in Kwazulu, where we recruited a team of around about 15 community activists. The criteria was that to be unemployed. They ranged in age from in the 20s to some in the 60s. Some of them never seen a computer in their lives before. But as a team, within a very short space of time, I'm saying months, they produced feasibility studies, raised finance, engaged the community, and actually installed a solar array on a piece of public land in Kwazulu. We assisted them, but at no stage did we actually do anything. The community structures that they established did everything, from the design to the implementation. Now, yeah, that's a pretty well-organized township, so it's an old township, so they're good community structures. But there are lots of communities around South Africa where you can do that. You know, all you need is a team of people to go out there and put them through the paces. This is not rocket science. We're putting up solar farms. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Patrick, thank you. Prof, would you mind to give us some feedback in terms of some of the questions posed?
Yes, I just want to respond quickly to Commissioner Mbodi's point about the buy-in, and I fully embrace that point. You know, I think there's the hesitancy that we hear is not to social ownership or ownership by workers of productive assets. The hesitancy we hear is a hesitancy about privatization and the fact that Eskom is struggling and how should Eskom be supported to do its job, etc. And I don't want to get distracted by that, because we're not saying you know, we must privatize Eskom. We're saying that the redistribution of renewable energy assets needs to take the form of social ownership, not just private ownership. So we're not in conflict on this matter at all. And I think you're very, very right to raise the question about whether these pilots are going to be overtaken by events, because in fact, it's already happening. So, I mean, we started the KwaZulu pilot in 2016, and so 8 years ago. But since then, there's been a massive expansion of renewable energy, but it's all been privately owned. So it's good. I mean, it's important that that happens, but we are missing that opportunity as we speak here in the seminar. I don't really have a response to the other points. I'm just accepting them as inputs. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, a final hand from one of the PCC colleagues. Devin, you've got the floor.
Sure, thank you. I'm very mindful of time, but just a quick broad response to both Commissioner Mbodi and St. Appleton. Just to inform that the PCC is, this moment as we speak, doing a very deep consultation in Mpumalanga to reach some sort of partnership across stakeholders. And embedded in this consultation process and partnership and building process is the issue of social ownership. So the issues that are raised both by Commissioner Mbodi will be addressed in the consultations that will unfold in the next 2 to 3 weeks in Mpumalanga, just to get a better understanding of what workers want, see how best we can embed in social ownership in it, understand what the challenges are, and try to work towards collectively responding to these challenges. Likewise, with St. Appleton, the issues is raised about skilling and capacity, the stakeholder consultations, particularly at the community level, will unearth some of these issues and the skilling requirements, capacity requirements required, not just for cooperatives, but broadly members of community that want to get involved in social ownership. And social ownership is a fundamental component of this partnership that we're bringing together. Thank you, Chair.
Devin, thank you for those inputs. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of the day of the specific session. And allow me just to share a few ideas and a few words with you. And I mean, in South Africa is grappling with the entrenched socioeconomic disparities, where energy surety, amongst others, access to affordable energy resources is unequal on so many levels. Many communities, particularly in rural areas, face energy poverty, lacking the reliable access to electricity. And I think hence today's discussion and the report helps us that social ownership of renewable energy must and can align with the country's imperative to address these disparities. It's important to involve labor, communities, local government in renewable energy projects on offer and offer an opportunity to uplift the marginalized areas, creating jobs, fostering skills development, and providing electricity access where it's needed most. There's a very old saying, the success of these initiatives will be to include everyone. Leave no one behind, as nothing for us without us still stays true till today. Big thank you to everyone that joined today, the esteemed respondents for their inputs. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and your inputs, your valuable inputs, and your support. And especially to Prof. Janet and her team. A big thank you and congratulations on a report well presented and a report that was well received. To you and your team at the Nelson Mandela University, a big thank you. Thank you to the PCC for hosting this session, as always professional and to the point. And to the Secretariat, the Lindiwes of the world, thank you so much for hosting this today. Prof. Janet, would you like to just maybe as a parting say something?
No, thanks very much. We're just grateful to have been able to be part of this process, and may it move forward rapidly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Prof. And to everybody that joined today, thank you so much. Be safe and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.